Hello and welcome to another exciting episode from Marvelous Videos. I'm your host Mystical Blue, and today I'll be taking you through Arno Stark, Iron Man's evil brother origin explored. Tony Stark of the famous Stark Enterprises is the only son of Maria and Howard Stark. That is what we have been told up until now. That's what we all believed, but that is not the full truth. Tony Stark has a secret brother, and he didn't know about him until much later. So, who is this secret brother? Well, it is Arno Stark. Some of you might know him as Iron Man 2020. According to Amazing Spider-Man Annual 1964 issue number 20, Arno was Tony's nephew. But later on, we find out who he truly is. Interested? Well, then keep watching as we explore the origins of Arno Stark, the Forgotten Brother, and the Intergalactic Defender. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Arno Stark? We find out who Arno Stark is through Tony in Iron Man 2013. It all began when Tony met the Rigelian Recorder 451. Wow, met is probably the wrong word considering the fact that Tony employed a bounty hunter, Deathstar, to find 451. But here comes the twist. Deathstar had double-crossed and made a deal with 451 to get Tony to his ship, where he started to control Iron Man's suit, AI Pepper. 451 then sat him down and showed him a recording that Howard had made before Tony was even born. In the recording, you can clearly see 451 with Howard as Howard tells the story of how he and Maria struggled and managed to give birth to him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let us go back to where it all really began, when Maria Stark experienced serious issues while trying to conceive a child with Howard Stark. Howard scoured the globe frantically to find some sort of treatment for his unborn kid after learning that the child wouldn't survive delivery. In order to secure his child's life, he finds himself saving the Rigelian Recorder 451 from the Grey, an alien species living in Area 52. The Greys used to masquerade as humans and roamed freely on the Earth. Using the help of the Stark 7 and another Grey, Rollo, who double-crossed just to get a little extra money, Howard Stark managed to save the Rigelian Recorder 451. However, while the Stark 7 managed to rescue 451, Rollo died at the hands of the other Greys because he got caught double-crossing. Now, who is this Rigelian Recorder 451? Well, 451 was a Rigelian Recorder who was basically a mechanoid with a defect that allowed him to remember what he had seen long after the data had been taken from him. He spent ages viewing the cosmos when he concluded that he needed to take action instead of just viewing humanity from afar. He left the Rigelian Empire and went rogue. Back at 451's ship, Tony is still trying to deal with the message he just heard from Howard when 451 told him to help defend the ship. He is pretty much forced to help out, so Tony goes and fights some more mechanoids. While he does that, there is another flashback and we get a better insight into what happened between Howard and 451 and learn how Tony fits into it all. Turns out, 451 thought that the Earth had promise, but he was concerned that before mankind could protect itself, the planet would be in danger from the many galactic empires. So, 451 planned to introduce someone into society to hasten the development of technology in order to ensure that humanity achieved its peak. This is where the Starks came in. He told them that their unborn kid was the ideal candidate to help humanity achieve the peak of technological advancement. Howard and Maria weighed their options, being childless or having a genetically modified child, and decided to go with having a genetically modified but biological child. During the next 5 months, 451 genetically altered the unborn child by giving Maria various injections. To make the process more transparent, he gave Howard access to all his notes and everything he was planning on doing with the child to ensure his survival. However, the day Maria went into labour, a couple of Greys showed up at the Stark mansion since they had gotten wind of 451's little experiment. Howard and 451 killed the Greys, but 451 reminded Stark that they were gone for now, but the Greys will return for the child. This was the moment when Howard made the video Tony had watched just hours ago. Turns out he had to go and fight the Greys, missed the birth of his son, and could possibly die in the process. But he gathered the Stark 7 and took them to Vegas, more specifically a casino owned and run by the Greys. We get an intense battle sequence here as the Stark 7 infiltrates the casino and confronts the leader of the Greys. When Howard gets to the leader, he promptly kills him instead of trying to make a deal with him. After that, 451 convinces Stark to put the rest of the Greys in a UFO and send them back in space because these Greys are now unemployed, have no loyalty that extends past their boss's death, and don't know anything about our little secret. It's ethically best to let them go. Now, while he does say that to Stark, he doesn't really follow through with it on his own. He compromised the system of the UFO so that the Greys ended up outside the UFO in space. It is obviously no surprise that the last of their species die due to this. With them out of the way, Howard returns to Maria and their newborn child. That was the story of how Tony Stark was born, or was it? Back at the spaceship with 451, Tony questions the story and asks 451 what it was that he had kept from his parents, and Tony was right. 451 had kept something from Howard and Maria. Out of his so-called concern for the Earth and humanity, 451 had genetically modified the Stark child in such a way that he could be the only pilot of a huge exoskeleton, a machine like no other, the God-Killer. So, it was not just about technological advancement that 451 was going for after all. Meanwhile, Death Star sees a bounty for 451 and boy, it's big. He obviously decides to go after 451 and get the bounty. At the same time, 451 tells Tony about the God-Killer while being inside it and how he had spent the last couple of years trying to locate the different parts of the machine. Tony is not a fan of the God-Killer. He says, "I see unimaginable technology creating an incomprehensible body count. I see people who could have done anything and all they did was churn out bigger guns. And after all this effort to make this ultimate God-Killer weapon, they lost." But for 451, the God-Killer is not just a machine. It is a message sent to the universe to stay in line and not cross humans. He wants to make it an Avengers universe, and so he activates the God-Killer and tells Tony to control it. But before Tony can gain control of the God-Killer, Death Star shows up to arrest 451. Unfortunately for Death Star, 451 is an all-knowing AI who can control pretty much any kind of mechanoid. Meanwhile, Tony is on tour of the God-Killer and trying to avoid 451. But 451 doesn't give up easily. He uses his mind control powers on Death Star and hunts down Stark. There is another intense battle sequence as Death Star does his best to use loopholes to override the mind control, and Tony tries to avoid being a pawn in 451's scheme. Unfortunately, Death Star falls to his death in the process. All of this also triggers 451's anger, so he directs the God-Killer to the nearest planet, Hope's Pustule, hoping that Tony's humanity will make him take control of the God-Killer and stop the attack on the planet, and he does. Tony wouldn't let an entire planet die, not on his watch, but somehow nothing happens when he wears the helmet that is supposed to control the God-Killer. The system did not calibrate with Tony. He tries to tell 451 that he made a mistake with the system and the machine isn't obeying Tony like it ideally should, but 451 just thinks that Tony is lying and not submitting to the system, and thus Hope's Pustule was hopelessly lost. This only angers 451 further, and he decides to target another planet in order to make Tony submit to the machine and take control of it. But how can he run a machine he cannot control or calibrate with? But this time, the planet is personal. 451 makes the God-Killer target the Earth. 451 then got ready for combat. Meanwhile, Stark gained access to his portable arsenal and the various armors that had been following him came into action. In order to fight against 451 in a way that he couldn't hack into the system of the suits, Tony arranged the suits in a sealed system. He then activated the heavy-duty armor and defeated 451 after focusing on and disabling his hacking unit. He then decided to show 451 that he cannot control the God-Killer no matter how hard he tries. Seeing it with his own eyes made 451 realize that Tony was telling the truth. He also realized that his plan was now futile. So, just before the God-Killer could reach the Earth, 451 aborted the mission. 451 was then determined that such a weapon or Stark couldn't be allowed to exist, and that all of his efforts and the creatures he murdered had been useless, because Tony could not pilot the Godkiller. As a result, he ordered the armor to lock his exits and fold out of existence. After realizing his mistake with the Godkiller, 451 decided to correct his biggest mistake, himself. He then proceeded to eliminate both himself and Stark's sole means of escape. Stark fled from the Godkiller just before it disappeared into another reality by entering 451's databases and obtaining the access codes. He then seized 451's corpse, intending to create new uses for the recorder's extensive data. Back on Earth, 3 months after the incident, Tony discovers why he couldn't control the Godkiller if he really was the genetically engineered son of Howard and Maria Stark. Turns out he wasn't. It was Arno Stark who was genetically engineered, and Tony was actually their adopted child. Turns out, while going through 451's notes and plans, Howard had discovered a covert genetic modification, a death switch that would risk his son's life once he reached adulthood. So, Stark created a bio-cocktail to kill the death switch in secret and administered it to Maria because he was worried that if he questioned 451 about it outright, then he would just do better to hide all traces. Unfortunately, the bio-cocktail did something else as well. There was a degeneration in Arno's system that wouldn't allow him to breathe without medical assistance ever in his life. Despite learning all these shocking things about his life, Tony somehow kept going strong. He went to the Maria Stark Foundation hospice where Arno was living and told him that he finally figured out that Tony was adopted and Arno was the real son of Maria and Howard Stark. But Arno and Tony end up having a great conversation. They bond with one another and work out the problems of the Earth. Tony also decides to help Arno out of his vegetative state. Soon after, in an effort to save the world and change it for the better, Tony and Arno started converting the rundown Mandarin city into Troy, a utopian, futuristic city. However, their scheme encountered opposition, and the sentient rings of the Mandarin began looking for hosts to eliminate Troy along with Tony. Lord Remaker, who was one of the Mandarins, bombed the Troy Central Control, where Arno was kept. After escaping their assault, Arno utilised his own armour to aid the Trojan Guard and Tony in fending off the attackers. Another one of the Mandarin clan that switched against Lord Remaker and decided to help out Tony was a far-left reporter named Abigail Burns. She did this because while she despised Tony Stark, she didn't want to see the city of Troy pay for it. Tony realised that it was his name causing all this chaos, so he stopped working on Troy and appointed Arno as the new custodian of the city. Arno then began using an exoskeleton to move around the city, giving a new life to his vegetative limbs. Arno met Abigail while helping Tony search for the ring bearers and found out that Abigail had recently been repenting since she lost both her ring and her hands to Malekith. Later on, using a Troy modular component cell set up in the shape of a massive battlesuit, Arno joined the last battle against the ring bearers in the Mandarin's city. Meanwhile, Arno had also begun working on repurposing the hazardous extremis to make it into a universal treatment. This sophisticated new extremis was crucial in preventing Bruce Banner from suffering a head injury later. After that, Banner and Iron Man were not on friendly terms with one another for a bit, so Banner duped Arno into tweaking the dose of extremis and enhancing Hulk's intelligence when Banner was not in control. In fact, this made the Hulk smarter than Banner. Arno believed he had completely overcome his illness, and his technological achievements finally gave him the ability to rewrite his own DNA and reduce the symptoms of his congenital ailment. Arno hacked his biological systems even more to get rid of the need for sleep. He then travelled the globe as the chairman of the Maria Stark Foundation, employing his acumen and cutting-edge techniques for charitable work, but he only became involved in circumstances and events that drew his attention and never really did things out of altruism. After the Second Civil War ended, Tony lapsed into a coma because of all the injuries he suffered in battle. He was put inside a bio-restructuring pod that Arno designed, which rebuilt his body cell by cell. After waking up, Tony retreated into seclusion. situation until he was fully recovered. Arno was later included in the search team that looked into Tony's disappearance. He then went on to respond to Mary Jane Watson's plea for assistance while she was assisting Amanda Armstrong, Tony's biological mother, in battling Jude, Tony's real father, a terrorist who had the support of Hydra soldiers. As Arno continued travelling, he met Sunset Bane, the dishonest CEO of Stark Unlimited's arch rival Banetronics. So, Arno, obviously not altruistic, started working with Bane, helping her with her attempts to steal data from Stark Unlimited and forming an alliance with him. During a virtual world crisis, he created a virtual reality space called the Escape. In this virtual reality, Tony faced two rogue AIs made out of the engrams, which are hypothetically constructs used to represent the physical process and changes in memory of Maria and Howard and Mistress and Arsenal. Arno broke into the Escape and saw Tony battle the two. While fighting them, Tony used his brain's unrestricted capacity to come up with an ultimate weapon, the Godbuster armor, which aroused Arno's curiosity. After the fight, Arno succeeded and saved the digital engrams of Mistress and Arsenal, along with some information of the Godbuster armor. Then comes Arno's arc as the new Iron Man, or as he is known in popular media, Iron Man 2020. Jocasta, Tony's robot body, sought Arno's assistance to replace her robot body with artificial organs in an effort to become more human. Despite Ultron Pym interrupting the surgery to kidnap Jocasta, the experiment set the stage for Arno to give Mistress and Arsenal artificial bodies, their engrams transforming them into exact replicas of his parents, along with their memories and even their thoughts. In order to gain influence over Jocasta, Arno also utilized his methods to replace her Sunset with an unwitting fake counterpart. During this time, Arno had started to believe that an alien AI called the Extinction Entity was a real threat to the Earth. The Extinction Entity was an aberration brought on by Arno's latent illness, which was likely to relapse and result in his death in less than a year. Soon after recovering, Tony came to grips with the realization that his new body had been created from scratch, making him an artificial creature and just a simulation of the actual deceased Tony Stark. Arno helped delegitimize his brother as a person and took over Stark Unlimited on the theory that Tony was his property because the biorestructuring pod used in his creation was of his design in order to ensure that all of Tony's resources would be at his disposal to stop the alleged Extinction Entity. In an effort to duplicate the Godbuster armor, Arno combined Stark Unlimited and Banetronics and used their resources to make his own Iron Man armor. Arno went out to protect all life on the planet from his own demon, the Extinction Entity, while assuming the identity of Iron Man. Arno believed the robot's rogue conduct was due to the Extinction Entity's arrival to integrate all artificial life forms first, then organic life, when they began to struggle for the equal rights in response to rising tyranny. As Iron Man, Arno rose to prominence as a leading AI enemy force, striking the other AI repeatedly in combat army. Tony, who was blinded by his own belief that he was no less artificial than a robot, headed the AI army in turn. After obtaining an uninhibitor, a device the AI Arno made used of the fact that the army had given robots free will to develop a submission code that could make any robot obedient to humans if it were to infect their operating system. Arno intended to broadcast it from Bane Tower to the whole planet in order to mobilize all robots into an army to battle the Extinction Entity. Unaware that Arno was preparing for their arrival, the AI army attacked Bane Tower after learning of Arno's plot to halt the broadcast. Tony rejected his brother and escaped when Arno caught him and tried to persuade him to utilize the submission code to bring together robotic and organic life. Arno replied with an attack that caused Tony to fall to his apparent death after he managed to destroy the antenna that was intended to broadcast the submission code. After this episode, Arno came to the conclusion that taking control of the robots was the only way to bring humans and machines together. With his clone parents, whom he had given new robotic bodies modelled by their original Mistress and Arsenal identities, Arno headed to the Stark space station to install the gadget he had created that could control people's thoughts. Tony, who had returned to his rebuilt body but no longer thought that he was a duplicate of himself, followed Arno along with a number of allies. Tony encased his brother in his virtual armor after learning the truth about the extinction entity and Arno's lifespan, but recognizing he didn't have enough time to persuade Arno out of his delusion before he enslaved mankind. Arno's life was prolonged by the suit, which also immersed him in a dream simulation in which he triumphed over the extinction entity and became a celebrated hero. In order to keep Arno company and keep him from discovering that he was in a simulation, Tony also persuaded Arsenal and Mistress to upload their consciousness into Arno's virtual reality. Sounds really intense, right? Well, it is. Arno Stark in Marvel's Avengers Assemble. The 14th episode, titled New Year's Resolution of Season 4 of Marvel's Avengers Assemble, featured the first ever appearance of Arno Stark. The episode kicked off with Peggy Carter and Howard Stark fighting off some Hydra soldiers in the year 1949. Peggy killed one of the Hydra soldiers who was trying to climb into their car when suddenly a pink vortex opened up and took them into another time period altogether. They were hurtled into the future where Iron Man, Tony Stark, and Captain America discovered their presence. When the two parties confront each other, there is a bit of confusion because in Howard's timeline, he hasn't met Maria or had kids yet, and Tony, on the other hand, is just having a hard time believing that his father is in front of him. But Captain America assures both of them that the other is real. So, the four then start working on finding out how Howard and Peggy ended up in the future. Turns out, the Hydra soldier Peggy blew up acted as a portal for time travel and brought them here. But that is not all. The Hydra soldier was really not a Hydra soldier. No, he was a disguised time traveler sent by Kang the Conqueror. Kang the Conqueror is a man from the future where they have perfected time travel. Now, why would Kang send his men to attack Howard Stark? Well, turns out the Stark descendants are causing trouble even in the future. In this episode, Arno Stark is shown to be a descendant of Howard Stark and is the main opponent of Kang the Conqueror in the future. Kang is sick and tired of fighting Arno, so he is using time travel to eradicate Howard himself so that there are no Stark offsprings in the first place. Unfortunately for Kang, his plan doesn't quite work out as Captain America, Peggy, Howard, and Tony manage to defeat him. But here comes the twist. If Howard and Peggy don't go back to the past in time, their existence will get erased and Kang will win. So, Tony and Howard quickly use their brains and put the Hydra soldier together again in order to recreate the portal. They are successful, and Peggy and Howard are just about to enter the portal when Kang shows up again from a portal to try and stop them. However, a massive man in a menacing Iron Man suit grabs him and takes him back into the portal he came from. That man was Arno Stark, the descendant of Howard and Tony Stark. After that, Tony is able to send Howard and Peggy back to the past in time and save them from being wiped out of existence. What makes Arno Stark so powerful? In order to create the supreme genius who would elevate humanity, the Rigelian Recorder 451 genetically modified Arno while he was still a fetus. Using Kree technology, among others, 451 improved Arno's intelligence and changed his thought patterns, making him think more practically than other known greats like Mr. Fantastic, Doctor Doom, or Black Panther. Arno is even smarter than Tony, since he is genetically engineered to bring about technological advancement. Arno rewrote his cell's programs with a substantially modified version of the extremist virus, allowing his body to operate considerably more effectively. These improvements' full scope has not yet been made public. He even eliminated his body's need for sleep. Arno first had to utilize a keyboard-controlled voice generator while confined to an iron lung. Tony provided Arno with a speech-generating earpiece that functioned with a telepathic interface before he was able to enhance his quality of life on his own. Later, Arno created a customized exoskeleton that allowed him to move properly and walk upright until his inherent illness was eradicated from his body. Can we see Arno Stark in MCU? There are many theories concerning the appearance of Arno Stark in the Marvel Universe. Some fans believe that the Iron Man suit seen flying in Doctor Strange 2 might be Arno Stark, since Tony died in Endgame. Now, this is actually a plausible theory considering the fact that Doctor Strange 2 is set in the multiverse, which could allow for a reiteration of the same character, Iron Man. Another theory pipeline towards the introduction of Arno Stark can be seen in the existence of Extremis in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Killian and AIM have used Extremis in the MCU before, and the formula has popped up various times over the years. Meanwhile, another group of fans believes that Arno might be introduced as part of the Dark Avengers. While Arno is not exactly evil, he is not always morally right either. He truly believes that only he can save the world and that everything he is doing is right. But he doesn't have the kind of diabolical drive villains possess. What is your theory? Do you think Arno is going to be introduced to the cinematic universe? How do you think they are going to introduce him? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.